Day 1017 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine, and for a change of pace video Friday. But starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 750,000 military personnel losses, including 8 tanks lost, 46 APVs, 20 artillery, and 1,660 personnel losses. And so 750k, quite the milestone, one would have to say. It wasn't an overnight occurrence, but 750,000 has now turned this 3-day SMO into a staggering loss for Russia. Then to take a look at the territory of control percentage stats, with Russia occupying a total of 18.47% of Ukrainian territory. And so to contrast this to this time last week, the value was at 18.45%, representing a 0.02 percentage increase of land occupied. Right at a time when Russian personnel losses have reached the 5th consecutive month of increasing losses, as the Russian MOD is in a mad scramble to take whatever land they can in lead up to the new year, but also to take back Kursk land to avoid that ongoing embarrassment that they face. Meanwhile, Russia's economy has developed a very serious and deepening labor shortage, yet they continue to throw away their civilians turned soldiers ever more recklessly, seemingly to support the grand illusion of possessing limitless power. And it is interesting to think the cognitive dissonance of how Russian industry and Russian government and Russian media alike admit a very serious labor shortage exists within their country, all whilst at the same time promoting this false narrative internationally of unlimited manpower in their army. These notions and realities face a clear disconnect. And we can see that because a desperate Russia most recently has recruited Yemenis into their Russian army, who have pretty quickly since encountered a troubling situation regarding their finances. Because upon their arrival in Russia, they were issued bank cards loaded with 1.9 million rubles, about 20 grand, 20,000 US dollars. However, it appears that 1.5 million rubles, about 15 grand, was swiftly withdrawn by a Russian recruiting company, raising significant concerns about the legitimacy of the contracts signed by these recruits. Exploitation, predatory recruitment, financial coercion, contractual fraud. Yep. That's the depths of the calculated deception and systemic fraud at work in Russia. Then there was also the other case of some elements of the Russian MOD dangling the carrot of obtaining Russian citizenship to migrant workers if they accepted a contract of no less than 1 to 5 years, with great pay, and told that it was better pay than what they were probably getting now. Except the reality of it will be, the pay will be a lot less, and the active duty combat would realistically be a lot closer to 1 to 5 days than 1 to 5 years. And a notable moment in this video is where one of the Russian soldiers asks, "Any volunteers?" Followed by all of the potential recruits just looking down at the ground, as you would, realistically. Now, hopefully it ends there, and there isn't any further off-camera activity where the workers get cited with a trumped-up charge that can only be resolved by signing a bogus SMO contract right on the spot. After all, the Kremlin and the Russian MOD can be utterly shameless at times. And then on that general topic, the cracks are starting to show because recent reports reveal a decline in Russian armored forces recruitment, despite at least a doubling in sign-up bonuses, with the reports indicating around 600 recruits daily, barely covering half or less of battlefield losses. And contextually, the third quarter federal budget shows fewer enlistments than before, highlighting their military struggle to build reserves amid heavy casualties. Russia has really been burning out their recruitment strength in the last quarter or two, and yet they haven't got much choice. they're opening too many fronts in Ukraine or have to deal with the Kursk front, combined with the fact that they have a strong desire to get the job done before the moment of what they might consider a wild card of a Trump presidency, that they feel would force them into negotiations based on the situation on the battleground come January 20. So as you can see, it's a real test to the Russian army, churning out as much manpower as they can to get, like I've mentioned before, about 0.02% of Ukrainian land at the most highly attritional of expenses. Then look into the map starting out in Kursk, as Russia is investing heavily in defensive measures in this Kursk region, reportedly allocating at least 10 billion rubles, approximately 100 million US dollars, to construct a comprehensive fortification system. This comes after an earlier expenditure of 3 billion rubles, or about 30 million US dollars, on defenses that failed to prevent Ukrainian incursions. Clearly, the old adage about throwing money at problems wasn't proven effective here, so let's see if this new investment can actually hold its ground, and literally at that. Now, local reports indicate that the entire border area is expected to be transformed into a fortified zone, which is expected to extend far beyond the AFU incursion lines, and instead mostly run roughly 150 kilometers northwest of Ukraine's positions in the oblast. Workers are said to be clocking in from 8 AM to 8 PM, earning around 5,000 rubles per 12-hour shift in cash, which is about $50 a day. Hardly seems worth it for the 12 hours of back-breaking labor, even when you factor in the lower wages, which is not helped much by very high year-on-year inflation in the country. So these fortifications appear to have a very Kursk-focused initiative, which A, should have been done a long time ago, B, may have the same level of funding misappropriation as last time, and C, doesn't necessarily stop the AFU from simply going around the fortifications just east and west of the Kursk border, if they so chose, at a later stage. Then also in Kursk, or at least in the Russian political dynamics of Kursk, in a recent shakeup, President Putin appointed a new individual, Alexander Hinchton, as the acting governor of the Kursk Oblast following the resignation of Alexei Smirnov. And this is important because it speaks to the silencing that occurs within the political landscape of Russia, where it wasn't too long ago that the now resigning Kursk governor Alexei Smirnov had, during one or two video conferences with Putin and various other southwest regional governors of Russia, showed a somewhat disgruntled and disagreeable Smirnov towards Putin, with Smirnov requesting Putin to address the escalating security situation due to those Ukrainian military activities in Kursk that started in August, effectively calling out Putin publicly, stating essentially that everything wasn't going according to plan, land was lost, the Russian military wasn't helping, and so on. As a response to these requests, Putin immediately went into face-saving mode, attempting to control the narrative, saying that it's being taken care of, and it wasn't a concern for governors to ask such questions. And so, as we now see with this so-called resignation of Smirnov, once again displaying this ongoing and classic Putin and Kremlin behavior, silencing those voices of opposition because Putin cannot handle bad news, we've learnt this, which is kind of an all-round tricky spot of an incomplete information landscape to find yourself in when you've led your nation into war. Somehow it reminds me of Putin's Minister of Defense, Belousov, an economist by trade with no prior military experience, but also Deputy Minister of Defense, again with no prior military experience, his niece, Anna Sivaleva. It's a disjointed political environment that's a troublesome status quo of Putin's own making, that contains no room for the principles of meritocracy, but instead reflects a system of cronyism where personal relationships and loyalty are prioritized over anything else. That's our Russia. Then briefly to the map today, early news in Kharkiv, where Ukraine has retaken positions northwest of Lipsy and struck into the settlement of Hiloboka, effectively keeping the Russian occupiers occupied on this front, or these two fronts, where they've been stuck ever since. And if they, being Russia were to withdraw from here or be pushed out of this region even, it's just a reality they cannot accept. It would just be an embarrassing blow to the military's morale and the Kremlin's morale too, leading to no option but, like I said, the occupiers being occupied. Then headed down the map because following a brief pause after localized Ukrainian counterattacks in Kursk, Russian forces have resumed activity within the central and southern regions of the town in a further concerted effort to take the town. Then headed further down on the map as Russian forces are enacting an encirclement tactic from Dalny to take the Hanivka pocket, which means the AFU will only hold on to the positions as long as feasible, as opposed to, say, allowing large swaths of Ukrainian soldiers from these positions to become captured, POW'd, or even worse. It also means there's likely a considerable amount of artillery and drone fire concentrated on this northern flank, just below Dalny, by the AFU for them to determine if there can be a sustainment of operations at the location. Then headed right across on the map to the less talked about Kherson front, where the battle for the Dnipro River Islands remains intense, with daily skirmishes as neither the Ukrainian nor Russian forces gain full control. As current, Ukrainian Marines counter attacks from Russia's 61st Marine Brigade amid heavy artillery and drone exchanges. So what's happening here is control of the islands is vital for attacks on Kherson City and the Ukrainian-held North Bank. But to date, despite Russian attempts to establish footholds here on the various islands, Ukrainian defenses led by those artillery and drones continues to hold strong, thwarting the enemy provocations. Then also on the map into Crimea, as Russian military units had to contend with a more water-based type of drone today, dealing with the AFU's naval drones once again, and reportedly stating the destruction of 5 of these drones near Kursk early this morning. Little more is known about the events at this time. Then to some news for today. So in a significant move to bolster its Ukrainian strike capabilities, Ukraine is set to receive 30,000 deep strike drones in 2025, as per a statement from Defense Minister Umerov. Previous to this, insights showed that in total Ukraine was projected to produce 1.65 million drones for 2024, with about 1.3 million already produced by October this year, and blowing right past that original 1 million drone target. Now, most of these nearly 2 million drones are the smaller FPV types, but most recently we got to feast our eyes on this new mothership drone, capable of carrying 4 baby FPV drones, and providing a repeater signal on the mothership for increased frontline range. Ukraine currently has at the very least 6 to 8 more of these mothership platforms in the works, having, for example, some of the large quadcopter types, or truly hexacopter types, having the 6 rotors, and others of the fixed-wing variety, those of which that provide a much higher range, with each platform designed for their own specific mission profile needs in battle. But then, even more impressive than that, President Zelensky announced combat readiness and serial manufacture of the new domestically developed and jet-propelled drone named Peklo, that includes a range of up to 700 kilometers, speeds also of up to 700 kilometers per hour, with multiple combat tests conducted already. And just so you know, that 700 kilometer range will get you to Moscow and then some. Plus, these are essentially a hybrid missile drone with specs like that. Now, as of just today, they have been handed over to the armed forces of Ukraine from manufacturer Ukroboronprom. So this is a frighteningly impressive addition to their arsenal. Then to some more news, and in a signaling change of political pace internally for Russia, Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov, or Little Caddy as I like to call him, has openly criticized Russian authorities, specifically targeting those close to Putin, due to the recent case of a Chechen teenager's house arrest. And as it so happened, crazy little caddy claimed Chechens operate outside of Russian law and vowed the teen's release, asserting a special status for Chechens. Kadyrov also criticized harsh treatment of migrants, calling them brothers of Chechnya, and positioned himself as their protector, highlighting these growing tensions with Moscow. This is not the first time Kadyrov has clashed with other political figures in Russia. Most recently, he suggested that politicians, and in this case, really oligarchs, in neighboring Dagestan were plotting to target him, making for yet another episode in this ongoing saga of Putin managing his unruly inner circle, where keeping the peace sometimes feels more like refereeing a family squabble than running a country. Then to some more news, and in an apparent attempt to project confidence, Russian officials are asserting that their economy will bounce back, with Putin himself claiming that Western efforts to impose strategic defeat have flopped. However, the head of the Russian Central Bank, Nebelina, has a more sobering assessment and timeline, suggesting it will take nearly 2 years to rein in inflation. She also stated that the unavailability of credit will lead to a cooling off of the economy. Translation: cooling means a weaker economy, a direct consequence of the unavailability of credit. And no surprises there. With such a high central bank interest rate, credit has become prohibitively expensive, soaring to a staggering 25% once local banks take their cut. And if this sounds familiar, it should. It draws parallels to the 2008 GFC, the global financial crisis, also known at the time as the credit crunch, where limited access to affordable credit strangled businesses and households alike. But in this case for Russia, it's arguably a lot worse. At least because back in 2008, credit markets pretty swiftly reopened. Whereas for Russia, the prolonged high interest rates seem less like a temporary fix and more like a long-term chokehold. Then to some more economy news, and something Russia really needs to get a handle on, as in a stark assessment of Russia's agricultural state, reports indicate a dramatic 40% drop in winter crop yields. This year's winter crop conditions are alarming, with only 31% classified as quote-unquote good quality, a significant fall from 74% last year. As the country grapples with these agricultural setbacks, the implications for the economy are severe, with winter crops, critical for food supply, falling at record rates, where the situation has now led to concerns about food security and potential economic fallout. I think Russians are really going to increasingly find that under Putin's almost quarter-century reign at the top of the Russian politosphere, that inflation or the general cost of living has gotten worse, not better, under his tenure. So the Russian problems of high-priced potatoes, mandarins, and butter are just the beginning. Then headed across to a few super quick funnies to round it all off for today, guys. As for the first one, it looks like the bottom of the Russian tank refurbishing barrel has been reached. So this done-for Russian T-62 tank surely takes the cake, the most recent cake at least, for a steel monstrosity. Of course, designed to defend against drones, but based on the outcome we see here, it was not designed as intended. And what are we at now? Turtle Tank version 2.0? 3.0? I cannot wait for the next generation. And it was just last week that we saw another one of the flammable, rubber-covered Russian MTLBs, with Russian operators seemingly sparing no expense or time in the protection of themselves, or perceived protection of themselves, for these death traps. Gee, I think I'd prefer the upcoming wave of bicycle and electric scooter transport we might expect to see a lot more of in the fields employed by Russian forces, like this recently captured 3-person strong Russian entourage of e-scooter riders finding themselves in range of Ukrainian drone cams. What a class act this Russian army is. And I mean seriously, sometimes we numb ourselves to it, but hasn't it all gotten just a little bit too ridiculous at this point for their army? Obviously not, as far as they're concerned. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like and comment. Thanks for sticking around, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!